Thanks for the introduction, and great to be coming to the end of this project and also closing off with the global assessment. And so I'll give a bit of background both to the global hotspots work that we've been doing and our new tool called Global Hotspots Explorer, which some of you may have been accessing. It's been a little tricky sometimes, reliability of the system, but let's see if it works later. So if we think back why we wanted to do this global part of the project, one way to look at it is a bit more aimed at who our key partners were. And if you are someone like GEF, they have really worked in recent years and in their latest funding cycle to move away from a silo-based approach and to identify investments and projects that deliver multiple global environmental benefits. And this is really recognizing how different sectors and systems are interconnected. And if you don't consider the interconnections when you're making investments, then you perhaps are not making the best use of your money. And if you are someone like GEF or UNIDO, they're working on hundreds of projects a year, investments in the order of billions a year in almost every country in the world and all sorts of sectors. And so the aim of Global Hotspots assessment was to develop an analysis and tools that would possibly help this type of decision making at a global scale in identifying challenges in different regions and different countries across different sectors and indicators. To do this, we developed a number of spatial indicators, for example, drought intensity, heat waves, changes in crop yield, and importantly, not just current situation, but under different climate change scenarios and also under different socioeconomic scenarios. We call these SSPs, and these describe a future with sustainable development goals and good progress on education and environmental quality, or futures with high inequality, for example. And at 1.5 degrees, we can see hotspots, for example, primarily in South Asia, but some other small patches around the world. At 2 degrees, these hotspots are growing into other regions, for example, parts of West Africa and Nile Basin and Central America, Southeast Asia. We can look at the difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees. For example, this was an important question in the recent IPCC assessment, was what were the benefits of 1.5 degrees? Wasn't well understood at the time. And also, let's say, a current policies or business as usual situation of about 3 degrees. And we can see hotspots much wider spread all over the world, more intense, particularly in the tropics and on every continent. And using this global assessment of relatively high resolution gridded data, also zoom into regions of interest, for example, Indus River Basin, and in a sense, suspicions confirmed that this really is a critical region. In terms of results and numbers of people impacted in the hotspots assessment, we wanted to identify how many people are facing multiple challenges and affected by multiple of those indicators across water, energy, and land sectors. And approximately 2.5 billion people in a 2-degree scenario, so this is what we could hope for in Paris Agreement, are still in a worse situation than they are today in terms of environment, climate, and development challenges. And this number of people approximately doubles or halves if we go to the 1.5 or 3 degree scenario. In terms of more sectoral results, at 2 degrees, we see approximately half the global population living in locations with high water stress or high variability, or extremely hot, uncomfortable conditions and existing under heat stress. And also approximately 1 billion people living in areas with, we could say, moderate to severe crop yield reductions, habitat degradation, and/or high levels of fertilizer pollution. The layered analysis with these different indicators and data sets also, we can look at locations where, for example, extreme events are to be more likely. And so if we take examples such as droughts, heat stress, and crop yield reductions, the red areas you can see are locations that are facing one of these indicators. And we can see that at 2 degrees, the area of people impacted by one of these indicators is larger, so that red area is spreading. But there are also more locations now facing these challenges with 2 indicators. So for example, Northeast Brazil, around the Upper Nile Basin. And then at 3 degrees, these areas are getting larger and more people impacted by 3 of these critical indicators. And I think these 3 indicators are particularly important for some of the most vulnerable people, especially living in rural areas or farmers, for example. And these are some of the regions and countries most impacted by these 3 specific indicators. And understanding the vulnerability of people impacted by climate impacts and changes in these indicators is really important, because we may face different climate impacts, but really how we experience that climate impact depends on our vulnerability. And so if you are low income, if you have low access to safety nets such as insurance or hospitals or doctors or education, emergency services, then something like a heat wave becomes extremely more severe. And so one of the key recommendations, and that we'll explain a little bit more in the slide after this, is really that Sustainable Development Goal action must be prioritized or targeted, in particular at the at-risk areas, because even with the, let's say, inevitable impacts of climate change at 1.5 degrees, we need to increase people's coping capacity to deal with these impacts, and do this by reducing vulnerabilities. And this is also particularly important to help people escape a poverty trap. We call it a climate poverty trap, where you are facing multiple challenges in successive years, and so you never manage to escape poverty because you are frequently rebuilding your home or similar things. If we look at the country analysis, so we decided to zoom in and understand how many people are exposed and how many of those people are exposed and vulnerable. We can see that India by far dominates, and this is in the most central scenario. So in a 2-degree scenario with what we call a middle of the road socioeconomic development. The red bars are the ones that we should be most concerned of. So these are people on low incomes and highly vulnerable. We can see that in all of these countries here, potentially tens of millions of people in approximately the 2050s facing extremely challenging situations. So how to improve their situations, how to improve their coping capacity, reduce their vulnerability to what are likely inevitable climate impacts. We really need to focus on vulnerability reduction. And the importance of this you can see on the right-hand graph here. So this is the difference between the best case and the worst case socioeconomic scenarios. And so in the worst case scenarios, in a world with very high inequality, more poverty, more rural population, low education, is vastly larger, an order of magnitude larger than the number of people that are vulnerable in the world which has good SDG achievements. And these are some of the SDGs that are particularly relevant: health, education, gender equality, and reduce socioeconomic inequalities in general. And we would argue, and I think this there's evidence from this project, but also very strongly elsewhere, that attaining these SDGs 3, 4, 5, 10 is really also underpinned particularly by these Nexus SDGs: zero hunger, access to water and sanitation, clean energy, so that's clean cooking access and electricity access, and also let's say a good surrounding environment, including air quality. If we have those underpinning, and this is what we've been working on in the other tools also, then achieving the other SDGs that reduce vulnerability 3, 4, 5, 10, for example, becomes easier. In terms of sectoral challenges, we can also see how this changes, let's say, in a warmer climate. Different countries face different challenges. Some of them are along that land energy access, let's say the hotter, drier countries. Some of them more along the land water access at the bottom, more humid, wet countries. But in a warmer climate, then these countries are not just, let's say, most exposed to one sector, but facing challenges in multiple sectors. And you see that grouping of the countries in the kind of central triangle. In terms of the project, we've been fortunate, I think, to present this to a lot of different audiences up to now, and have received a lot of interest. And this is also stimulating a lot of new and exciting work with a range of partners, and a lot of acknowledgements to lots of people that are increasingly becoming involved in this type of work. As I think mentioned in the other presentations, a lot of this is underpinned in a kind of an open source ecosystem, and we'll see now in the Hotspots Explorer how we're trying to make more of this information available and accessible to wide audiences to support, I think, more learning on this topic, and also more education, better decision making. So we saw this slide earlier, launch of the Hotspots Explorer. We're certainly learning by doing. This will be the website that really presents the data behind the analysis that we've seen, and the website is still in development and will continue to be developed beyond the ISWEL project. The key motivations behind the project have been obviously to share the knowledge that we've and insights that we've gained in a different range of different media and formats, including articles, policy briefs, but also the interactive data exploration. Let's say good scientific foundations and open data, and also making this accessible not just on the web but also on mobile is increasingly important, and to make it relevant to a wide number of stakeholders. So coming soon on the website will be full data download of the spatial data, and we're also looking to improve a country basin dashboard, so you can select a country and see much more detailed information at the indicator, sector, and vulnerability level. So we'll just go to the website now. We definitely were having some problems this morning. Some of you may have seen. I'll just bring it up onto the screen. Yeah, so there is a Murphy's Law of live demonstrations, which says do not do it, because things will always break, and that's definitely something we're having now. But I will show you some of the features, and I also have some slides that show that, so I apologize for that. Can you still see the web browser, or are you looking at the presentation?
Yes, the web browser is there.
Okay. So this is the main homepage, quite nice and simple, and the website features two main, let's say, components. One is the Explorer, which is our Google Maps style of presenting the spatial data that we've been looking at, and the other are stories. And so these are articles which have a more accessible kind of reading format, but also feature nice images and kind of interactive data inserts. So this is an overview of the map that, I apologize, is not working. But I'll show you the overview, and then I can show you some backup slides that I have. On the left, we can see the scenario selection. We can choose those different scenarios that we looked at in the assessment, the different climate change scenarios and vulnerability scenarios. And this describes, for example, we can choose different vulnerability levels. So if we're interested in the whole world impacted, or for example, just people on lower incomes. And then we can see our choice of the different indicators, and these load in fairly colorful maps to show exactly the hotspots maps that we've been looking at. We also see up here on the top right different visualizations options, so we can toggle the opacity of the different layers, locate ourselves. We can export the current map, for example, and change also the color scheme. And we can also switch it. Currently, you'll see that this is in countries mode, but we can change it to river basins if that's your preferred focus. Oh, now we seem to have some data coming through. Might be too many people accessing. I don't know if that's the case. So now we can see the map for water stress, for example. Another interesting feature is, for example, and I have this on a different tab. So this is another example for drought intensity. Is here in the top right, you can click on to open another Explorer tab, and you can open many of these. I haven't tested what the limit is, but I know at least 5 or 6. And so then you can do various types of comparison. We may choose to compare, for example, the same region with the same indicator, but under different scenarios. We could compare 2 different indicators or 3 different indicators for the same region, or as you can see, scroll around to different places and well, if it loads, then compare different regions, perhaps with the same indicator. So all the options fully functional in these different tabs to make lots of different types of comparisons. Lastly, the feature that I'll show you is that when you click on a basin or a country, we get this pop-out map, and this is the mini dashboard that we have. And so we have a description here just about the country, some of the key characteristics from climate and development perspective. And then we have an interactive graph here showing the number of people exposed. It automatically picks the top 3 risks or the top risks from each sector and the multi-sector risk. But you can also change these and add all of these different indicators that you've seen to customize your own graph, and it just grows in size. You can add them all if you want. You can also download an image or download the data directly for that country. It comes in a small Excel file or CSV file. And then here, these buttons, you can see you can actually toggle. And so currently we have the number of million people in population terms showing, but we can change that to the land area that's impacted, or the percentage land area that's impacted, or the percentage population that impacted, depending on your interest. Very soon, we'll be launching another button that comes here, which will, as I mentioned, open up into the full page country dashboard that you will be able to explore the data in even more detail. On the stories side of things, and this is coming to the end of my presentation, probably talked too much, Piotr. We've got the different stories that developed with different people, one about the data, one about water risks, each one about the basins. Let's see. And so these are a combination of text, images, insert graphics, just detailing some of the challenges for that location. Lastly, I think on the using resources, as I said previously, this is be able to find the data, policy briefs, different articles, and very soon I hope we'll also launch what we call an Educator's Toolkit, so that, for example, high school teachers or university lecturers may be able to give demonstrations or a class or two on climate impacts and hotspots, and download materials that's already available and tailored to them. I'll leave it at that. I think very important to acknowledge certainly a lot of feedback that we've received during the development of this, and the funding and partnership with our funders, UNIDO and Global Environment Facility. They've been excited and supportive of this project, and definitely looking to use it in the project development phase in the near future. So thanks. I'll leave it there and happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Ed, for this fantastic presentation. So let's come straight into the questions. We already have one. With the tools like Hotspots Explorer, how can I downscale the methodology to city or local government area within a state?
Yeah, good question. So the grid squares that we have and have used are at this 1/2 degree resolution, and this is approximately 50 kilometers. I would say it's not entirely or not the best tool available for a type of city scale or even more smaller decision making, but I think could be useful to understand challenges that you face at a regional or country level. How do perhaps your cities compare to each other, but I think has to be taken carefully as an overview and a high-level assessment that's done at the beginning, not as the final assessment that can be done probably better in some cases with other tools, with remote sensing and really observational data. Yeah, not going to pretend it does everything. So
this capacity is expanding and expanding of these tools, but if you have a global explorer, it's unavoidable trade-off that you can't get the details of any single place.
Yeah, I mean, I think if people use it in cities and things, we'd definitely be interested to hear also if and how that's helpful. So yeah, also send us an email.
So here's another question which went into the chat, and I read it, which is about specific outputs that you've shown. As far as I research, for example, South Korea is under a high risk of water stress, but it doesn't show at the Explorer now. Would it be because lots of people are accessing the map now? This takes time to be displayed on the map? Or, I mean, of course, there are all kinds of specific assumptions. I'm not sure if you can relate immediately to South Korea case, but maybe you can more generally explain, this kind of differences which might appear that if people have from their data on that something is high stress or hotspots, and if it doesn't show up, how this can be reconciliated.
Sure. Yeah, there's definitely different assessments and lines of evidence, and I think we should be careful about looking at one pixel or one very specific location saying, oh, I'm not sure if it's situations exactly like that. In the end, these are global models and global tools that are designed to show mega trends. But I think also how we have adapted, and also the world that we observe in terms of, especially in developed countries, doesn't necessarily always well reflect the underlying situation that's shown in the environment. And so I've spent time in the UK, and UK is actually quite somewhat a water stressed country, technically speaking, in terms of low levels of rainfall in the southeast, and everyone thinks it's a very wet country. But because of huge water demands and also good governance in water infrastructure, people don't really experience water stress as other places, which can actually be quite wet, but are poorly managed. Yeah, I think we're also looking in this initial phase to receive feedback if people think that particular parts of the world are not well represented, or if what's presented on Hotspots Explorer is different, because I think with this iteration and feedback between let's say, macro and local, we can try and improve representation of this data.
Thank you. And one more question about using the data for academic purposes. So I imagine maybe you can, it actually brings us closer to the final session about using this data. If someone wants to write an article and using the outputs produced by the Explorer, how would it look like? Do they need to contact you, or they can just take the data and just cite it? Maybe you can comment on this.
Yeah, very happy for people to use the data. So some of it is available. For example, you download the country information that's already working, and the spatial data will be available hopefully within the month or so. And also happy for people to use this non-commercially. Initially, we need to, I think, decide exactly how to deal with commercial cases.
Okay, thank you.